This Thrive Loud episode is brought to you by Hinge Consulting. Success on Amazon hinges on well-executed strategies. Contact Hinge Consulting to learn about total Amazon channel management and to see if your business has what it takes to grow over 300% over the next 12 months. That's Hinge Consulting at hingeconsulting.co.
Welcome back to another episode of the Very Serious Business Podcast. The show that explores the old ways of making money are the only ways. Today, we'll speak with Humperdinck Elderman, a man whose motto is, if you're happy in your field of work, then you're obviously not working hard enough.
Hold up. Humperdinck? Seriously? I don't think so. Welcome to 2018, people, the year where we strive to thrive each and every day. And don't use words like Humperdinck. Want to know how you can get started? You need to listen to the amazing episodes that Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond has to offer. Want to jumpstart your business? Thrive Loud. Looking to be inspired? Thrive Loud. Want to work smart and not hard? Thrive Loud. Drop kick the old stuffy way of doing things and get out there and change the world. Listen to Lou Diamond as he brings you the smartest leaders and most dynamic guests with the most energizing messages. Listen to Thrive Loud and you and your business will start thriving too.
It's time to take an inside look at those that are taking their lives, their businesses, and their passions to the next level. Get ready to Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond, connecting you to the most inspiring and amazing people that are thriving each and every day. Today on Thrive Loud, we bring you co-founder and CEO of Forder, Israeli military intelligence specialized in training in cybersecurity and how to prevent it. He is determined to make his vision of totally fraud-free e-commerce a reality, and that's what we're going to talk about today in his incredible company. Thrive Loud listeners, Michael Reitblat. Michael, how are you today?
I'm pretty good, pretty excited. Thanks for having me here, Lou. Let's get started.
It's a total pleasure. And the Thrive Loud community, we love having great business leaders on. We love having amazing entrepreneurs. And you have a pretty good story and a really interesting and important business area that everyone is focused on. I don't care what industry you're in. So I think it's really important to kind of paint the picture, give us a little bit of all your background, and I will interject appropriately, and we will hear some of your journey. Does that sound good to you, Michael?
Makes sense. So I think
all right, you're off.
Our story, or my story, in the relationship to the Forder story, probably begins almost 20 years ago, as you mentioned, in the Israeli military intelligence and the Israeli cyber command, where was the first time I started detecting bad guys. I've been in that business for ever since. Now I can talk a lot about what we did in the Army for understandable reasons. But right after the Army, I've joined a couple cybersecurity companies where, just to make sure everyone understands, the general role of cybersecurity companies are the prevention of disruption of service and the prevention of extraction of information. For instance, we heard the Equifax was hacked and data was stolen, or consumer data was stolen out of it, or we had DNS services being disrupted and Twitter wasn't available. Right, so kind of two examples. After that, I kind of shifted into another company called Fraud Sciences. That was my first time doing fraud prevention. And the difference of fraud prevention into kind of regular cybersecurity is it's the prevention of the fraudulent usage of the information that was previously stolen. Right. So if we go back to the Equifax example, right, stealing the data from Equifax is a cybersecurity problem when people use the stolen information on other sites to try to commit fraud, apply for a credit card, use a stolen credit card, or hack into an account or whatever that is. That's where we kick in. And back in our story, right? So Fraud Sciences was the first company to offer kind of have a very unique proposition for the e-commerce community back in the early 2000s, right? So very different e-commerce than what we know about today. And was the first to say, we will take the risk of fraud upon ourselves, right? So reviewing the transactions, making the decision instead of the merchants, and assuming the liability in case we get it wrong. Now, what people, some of the listeners may not be aware of, but every time a transaction happens online or digitally in the broader context, right, what's kind of professionally called card not present transaction, right, when your physical credit card is not there, the liability for fraud,
which the merchants get hit for a pretty significant fee on that charge. I'm pretty aware of. So tell us what goes on when the transaction actually happens. Yeah.
Right. So if you go to the store, right, and you dip your card, and ever since the U.S., especially since the U.S. implemented the EMV regulation on the chip cards, right, the liability is on the banks. It's not on the merchants. Every time it's card not present, the liability is on the merchants, which forces every merchant, right, every retailer, everyone who transacts digitally, to develop their own fraud prevention capabilities, because if they're not good at it, they'll just go out of business.
Right.
And traditionally, what everyone has been doing is buying different tools, building a team internally to kind of work elaborate sets of rules. For instance, right, if the IP geolocation is from a certain country and your credit card is not issued by that country and you're shipping it to another third world country, something looks suspicious here, so we will flag you and either decline you or send you to be reviewed by a manual agent or a manual review agent. And in the end of all of that cumbersome process that every retailer has to do on its own, the U.S. retailers lose about $4 billion to fraudulent transactions every year, right? Which is a crazy number in itself, right? Especially considering all the effort that I just described that they have to go through. But the biggest issue here is actually not the fraud damage, but is the damage caused by the fear of that. Because all the retailers are kind of way too conservative, and everything that sometimes something looks suspicious, they will choose to err on the side of caution and decline that customer. When you start factoring in how much business is getting lost to kind of direct false positive, right? I want to buy something, you decline me, so I didn't buy that, and you lost the transaction as a retailer. But then as you start adding the lifetime value of me as a customer, and potentially the lifetime value of my friends as customers, because I tell them, hey, I tried to buy something and it didn't work, so just don't go to that website anymore. And factoring in all the marketing efforts that those retailers are doing to get me to the site in the first place, these are huge losses that we're talking tens of billions of dollars, right? Not compared to the four. It's essentially outweighs that, but there is no good way for retailers to deal with it. And it wasn't for a very, very long time. Right, so you can improve the tools that you're using, you can improve the quality of your data, you can try to train your people a little better, or introduce specific authentication methods. But the numbers were pretty consistently the same, right? Because at the same time, fraudsters are getting better and better at it, and they can scale, and we'll talk about this a little later. And for us, so my co-founders and our early team and myself, we were in as I said, bad guy detection business for a long time. And you see that it's kind of speaking in army terms, right? It's an asymmetrical warfare here. Because if you're the perpetrator, if you're the fraudster, you have to find something wrong with one retailer one time, and then you're in business. Since, especially factoring in that a lot of the professional fraudsters are coming from, let's call them, countries with lower cost of living, right? So they don't have to steal that much money to make it cost effective for them. And as a retailer, you have to defend against all the fraudsters all the time. And that just becomes too expensive, and it's kind of asymmetrical, that gives fraudsters the advantage.
Gotcha. So I'm guessing this is where I guess the need comes in. You found the need of where the problem is. So this is how the idea of where Forder, I guess, has come to play, in that you've got issues on both sides, the merchant and obviously the customer. How did you recognize? This is where you recognize where you can inject yourself in the process, and I guess this is how this all came to be.
Yes. So to complete one more piece of the puzzle here is Fraud Scientist was acquired by PayPal back in 2008. And then my co-founders and their team were kind of heavily involved in building the new fraud prevention infrastructure, risk infrastructure at PayPal. They actually have a very big office in Israel based on that acquisition now. And we substantially impacted PayPal's performance, right? So both reducing false positives and reducing fraud to a point where the perception was almost, oh, we have fraud under control. And outside of PayPal, that just wasn't the case. Just to give you a very simple example, back in, I think, 2012, I was trying to buy a new iPhone, and I was living in Israel at the time, so I tried to use my Israeli credit card to do so, and I got rejected. And it took me a while to figure out why. Basically, there's a system called address verification system, right, AVS, for the people in the business, which compares the numerical values of your address, so the number of the department or the house number and the zip code, and compares it to the registry in the bank. Now, Israel is not plugged into that system, but accidentally, our zip code system is very similar, right? 5 digits. And Apple was trying to outsmart the fraudsters that were trying to outsmart the AVS system and make sure that the zip code I provide, or the customer provides, matches the address they provide, right? To avoid people putting the wrong number.
Right. So, but what I was getting at is, isn't that a good thing in the sense that, we've heard situations where, people from Uzbekistan or other places in other parts of the world are hacked into cell phones that are making transaction or trying to enroll onto a site. And then, because that really isn't the person who it is, we want to make sure at least to put that first line of defense. Now, is that number so large that there's that example of that AVS mismatch that it's kicking out that many people from transacting?
The ratio is something like 20 to 1. That's actually, I'm kind of happy that you made that comment because most people think that, oh, that's a good thing, right? Just to complete my Apple example, they did exactly that. They verified that the address that I gave them, which was a hotel in San Francisco, where I was staying, and the zip code, which went with the same addresses don't match, so they rejected me. After I figured it out, I had to fake an address in Washington State to go with my Israeli zip code that doesn't even connect to the system in order to not to buy my phone. Right, most people are.
And that of course is even worse because you've now actually done something technically fraudulent to be able to get around the system. I got you.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. But you can understand that most people, first, they don't understand what's going on. Second, even if they understand that they're being rejected because of the address, they can't figure out what they have to do. And to just give you a really simple example of how common it is, I was just talking to an apparel company about a month ago. And they said, well, we don't have a lot of fraud and we don't decline much, which tells you there's something wrong, right? Because we know the industry numbers. So I asked them for a report of their transactions. And I look at this and I say, well, you actually declined 22% of your business. Now, 22% of an e-commerce business, right? They sometimes don't grow that much in several years. And when I looked at can you show me the rules of why are you declining so much? Because, right, remember, they told me they don't decline anything. I said, oh, yeah, that's our bank. Actually, we told them to, every time there's an AVS mismatch, there's an address, the shipping address is different from a billing address, just decline it because it's probably fraud. And when we further kind of dug into the data and we showed them, no, most of that is not fraud. It's people that are shipping to a different address than they're shipping to their office and not their apartment, or they're shipping to their relatives because they're going there for the holidays, or they're buying gifts, or they're international buyers. They actually don't even understand what a billing address is. So they do them in reverse, right? They type in the wrong address, the hotel address and the billing address, and then their credit card number and the credit card address in France and the shipping. They sometimes don't get it, and you're just losing too much business. Another great example of the same kind of trigger happiness on the decline, on the being too conservative, is and to your point about people in Asia, right? People will often say, I have this great technology to detect when someone's using a proxy server, right, or some sort of a VPN or tunneling to connect to my website. And that way I know that they are not really browsing from the US, right? They're browsing from some other country. And I want to decline them because that's a really strong indication that they're fraudulent. But what happens is every time someone uses Google Translate, it shows up as if they're using a proxy server. Now, if you want to decline, and that causes you to decline a lot of international buyers. Every time someone tries to browse from China, right? Sometimes they used to use VPNs for different reasons. and you'll start declining them. Every time people working at, I don't know, Goldman Sachs in their office in London will connect through the corporate VPN that will go through New York, you'll say, oh, that is something someone's trying to be, to portray himself as an American. Right? What happens when you have kind of classical story of you have a soldier and that's deployed in Afghanistan, he's coming home, he wants to surprise his girlfriend for Valentine's Day, right? Talking about next week. He tries to buy something and he gets declined.
Yeah. So we have all these issues, and I totally get it. And I think you've given great examples of this. Now, so I'm guessing this is what inspired and created. Where does Forder sit in this particular space to help make this not fraudulent, but also help not lose these other opportunities that are out there?
Exactly, right? So we said there are two ways to solve the problem, right? We can, everyone else in the industry was saying, we will build better tools. We will use machine learning and AI and better detection algorithm or better data collection or whatever it is. It will give retailers better tools to do their job. And we said it shouldn't be the retailer's job in the first place. Right? Retailers are not fraud experts. They have a lot of other issues to deal with to compete in their market. They should know their customers. They should know their products. They shouldn't know fraudsters. We are really good at knowing fraudsters. So we figured out a way of let's build it what we've kind of trademarked as decision as a service. We will review their transactions for them. We will give them a decision and not a signal or a data point. We'll tell them either yes or no, approve or decline. And if we approve something and it turns out to be fraudulent, that actually is going to be on us. Like we're shifting the liability away from them. And that does three things. The simple one is they don't have to do anything, right? So all those tools and data and labor that I was talking about goes away. The second obvious is they don't have to risk anything because, right, we assume all the chargeback liability. And the third one, which is by far the most impactful, is their sales go up. In every single case we worked with the customers, their sales went up because false positives went down, and because of all of that friction that I mentioned, from limiting me where I can ship stuff, or having people to manually review transactions, which will delay it, which will cause them to call me, right. And sometimes you can't answer, or they send you an email when you're away, or you're in a meeting and you don't answer, and they cancel it. Right? There's a lot of those kind of creates a lot of friction in the process.
Yeah. So, Michael, let me jump in here, Michael. So okay. So, what is Forder doing on your end? So, you're taking the liability. What are the types of things that you're doing? Because that you're the fraud experts, and without showing too much behind the curtain, because we don't want the fraudsters to know this. But some of the key things that you're doing that's unique that obviously the retailer shouldn't do. And I totally agree with you. This is the right thing. Hire the experts to do what they do best and let them handle it. But what's some of the key things that you're doing to recognize that, this is the real type of transaction that's going on? Are you able to do it that fast that returning soldier from the Mideast coming back is able to make an order and surprise his wife in the transaction time that would be required that would still make the customer experience worthwhile?
So the first thing that you mentioned, right, we have the expertise and we can actually hire the right people. So all of our engineering and research and analytics team is doing Israel. We hire a lot of people from the same kind of profile of military intelligence background, of risk prevention. Right, as I mentioned, there's a lot of companies that are starting their risk related functions there in Israel. So we have really great and really dedicated kind of talent that we can pull to solve this problem. Second one, we can invest way more in technology, and right. We've raised over $50 million so far as a company. Most of it went into building the system. And that's not an investment any retailer can afford, even the very big ones, right? Maybe Amazon excluded. But right. And that enabled us to develop a lot of really unique kind of technologies to detecting fraud. And what we have to remember in fraud is enable to avoid the false positives that I mentioned, where we need to understand the context of the transaction, right? The fact that you're connecting from the Middle East and you're using an American credit card doesn't tell me much. But if I can understand that you're probably a soldier, and now it explains why you have an American credit card and why you actually connect from an APO IP address and so on. I'll actually give you maybe a better example, or a simpler example, right? We mentioned I'm a Russian born and raised, so kind of politically correct doesn't apply to me. And I'll give you a very simple example, right? If you're
good, by the way, we could use a little of lack of political correctness here. So keep going. That's what Thrive Aloud's about. As direct as you can. So go.
it's if you see a transaction from a Russian IP, and that's the only thing you know about it, it's probably 70% fraud, right? Not because 70% of Russians are fraudsters, but because some of the fraudsters are very, very active, and they invest a lot in technology to automate their side, right? And then you see, so it's a transaction coming from a Russian IP using a Swiss credit card, shipping it to a hotel in New York, and they're buying a very expensive watch. And let's say the behavior that led to that was they came to a watch website, they sorted all the products by price, they selected the most expensive one, and they requested next day air shipment without even reading the warranty. Right? Everything here screams fraud. Right? If that's the only thing you know, and mostly with the tools retailers are using now, that's what they'll know. They'll decline it, and that'll be a mistake. Because when you zoom further, and just to give you kind of a perspective of the zoom in, right? We collect about 5,000 to 6,000 different data elements for every transaction, and kind of on standard, there was a company that actually Experian acquired a couple of years back that's called 41st parameter, because back in the day they developed the 41st, right? There were 40 parameters you look at, and they then developed the 41st one, so it's better. And we're at 5,000 to 6,000, right? Just to show you the data complexity. So coming back to my Russian transactor example, we will know that it's not just an IP from Russia, but it's actually from the Rublovka neighborhood in Moscow that has the highest real estate prices and the highest, lunch prices, so restaurant prices. So you'll know that's probably a really wealthy neighborhood, right? So we ranked all the geos by the kind of potential income of the people living there or working there. We know that it's a residential neighborhood and not not kind of an office place. And then we know that you're using a fairly new Apple computer, an expensive model, and you have a really fast internet connection. Right, so there are more and more indicators showing that you probably have money.
Right. No, and you're segmenting out the customer, which is really cool, and you're obviously getting that level of detail through your, and then obviously through behavior of knowing which ones were fraudulent in the past. You're then narrowing it down from tracks of behavior and other types of activity. Like I guess you also are looking at, is that particular IP address incredibly active and doing, even though they could fit all those good criteria living in one particular place, but they could be fraudulent if they're doing lots of other things that I guess your system helps to pick up. Gotcha. All right, very cool.
Right. I just told you a piece of a story, right? So if you remember, we have, so think of it, in every transaction you have up to 3 people, right? You have the cardholder, you have the buyer, and you have the person you ship the goods to. So you need to understand how they're all related. Is it the same person, and does it make sense? Right. So we know that the person is in a kind of wealthy Russian neighborhood currently and probably using some expensive stuff. And then we know that the credit card is issued by a specific branch of Credit Suisse that we know is associated to a lot of other wealthy people from Russia, right? They just bank outside of Russia. And the hotel they're shipping to is the Mandarin Oriental, right, on Columbus Circle, and not something else. And as the more data we collect and the more we look at the behavior, all of a sudden, it's way more corresponding with a wealthy Russian visiting New York. They want the most expensive watch because they're showing off, or that's the model they had before. And right, if you know how packages are being delivered or handled in the Mandarin, you know that to get it out, if you're not a guest, you'll literally, you need to fake passport, you need to avoid 20 cameras. And if you know how to do it, you'll go rob a bank because you're overqualified for just stealing a watch. And in that context, it's pretty clear that you're not a fraudster.
Right. I love this, by the way, because the Thrive Loud listeners are literally seeing the mind of a former intelligence officer who is analyzing it to the levels of data. And this is now my segue question to this is, and you've obviously, the company has been around since 2013, right? That's when you guys founded. How's the company grown? And being a leader of this company, what does Forder look like today? It started out with you and a partner. What is it today?
Yeah, so we were 3 founders, right? My 2 partners and I. And we literally work like a classical startup in the basement of one of the founders at some remote town in Israel. And before we got any funding or before we got any people. And then we started assembling teams from, right, the personal the people we knew from the army, the people we knew, like we brought a bunch of people from high school. Actually, one of my partners and I, we know each other from high school, right? So we know each other for over 20 years. And it really enabled us to bring this core team together. Still working, I think our first office was like on the fourth floor on top of a gas station. We're trying to be really put all the dollars we have into technology to make sure we bring the best product to market. So we launched our product in 2014. Took us a while to build it, right? You can't have an MVP for fraud. You'll just lose all your money. We were really successful at getting early traction with really great customers. I still remember coming to New York for the National Retail Federation conference back in 2014 and literally knocking on doors of a few people we knew that they're selling stuff online and trying to convince them that we have a better solution. It kind of looked weird, but luckily it worked. Right, we started getting this traction, and what you realize that, right, I told you about the people that we have, and I told you about the technology that we have, but you realize that the bigger you are, the easier the problem actually becomes. Because you have all of the data, right? You're seeing the same fraudsters move from one retailer to the other. You're seeing the same weird-looking Russians buy and a bunch of different merchants, right? And it makes the problem easier and easier. And as we are experiencing this massive growth of customer adoption and then data that we are able to pull, the quality of our service keeps getting better and better and better. Yeah, right. We're currently processing about $25 billion kind of on an annual rate of transactions. And
how many people are in the company that you have right now? How big is the company?
So we're about 100 people, a little less. Most of it is very tech focused, right? So if you build the best technology solution, you don't need that many people to support it or to review it or help make it accurate. Everything's in the tech, and everything is in the data collection and data delivery and processing and so on.
Michael, I want to take your hat off of the security and the fraudulent piece for a second. I want to put your business hat on as a CEO here. Obviously, look, that's a pretty fast amount of growth to a lot of people in a very short amount of time. What's your vision for where you want Forder to go? And then I have a follow-up question and this relates to what's going on in the world of e-commerce, specifically with so much business being directed into the channels of Amazon and how that plays in with a lot of what Forder is doing.
Sure. So the first question is, we really want to create this fraud-free environment for e-commerce, not because we can eliminate all fraudsters. Unfortunately, that they're here to stay. But we don't want retailers or fraudster, and you don't suspect them that they're not selling you the right, like they'll steal your credit card or they'll steal your information. And online, we still have trust issues between the merchants and the consumers. Between we see a lot of people, merchants will move you to open an account and transact through an account and not give them a credit card every time, but then people will get your password and your account will be compromised, and then you'll lose trust in the merchant, even though it wasn't the merchant's problem, right? There's a lot of this kind of friction and mistrust still being in place. In ability to invest in technology to really create the most frictionless, consumer welcoming ecosystem. And when you do the math from their end, because of such a high lifetime value of their customers, it makes sense for them to take more risk and to approve as much as possible and to reduce the friction as much as possible. Right? They don't ask for the every time. They don't ask you almost any questions. Everything, just click here you go. And we're trying to build exactly that for everyone else that's on Amazon, right? And if we were a merchant, we were the second largest after Amazon, and I'm sure we'll be larger than Amazon within maybe 2 years with the rate that we're growing. So we'll have more data, same investment in technology, and we'll actually be able to have all the other retailers that are currently not, even if they're not competing with Amazon directly, they're competing with the expectations consumers have from working with Amazon. And we want to enable them to give the same level.
It's pretty cool. And by the way, one of the interesting things about Amazon, I only know this from a friend of mine who she had set up an account. She moved. She might have even changed the business address, and there may have even been a divorce or a name change in the process. And how difficult it was for her to get back into the Amazon system because so many changes had happened in changing an account because they're so concerned about that, experience. For those that, yeah, it's a really easy experience when everything's going great. For those minor situations where they recognize it, they're very on top of it. But to your point, there's a ton of business going on in that fiefdom, and there's also a ton of stuff outside of it. And it's companies like yours that are trying to help the merchants and the retailers out there. First of all, kudos to you. I look, CEOs from Target and from Neiman lost their jobs because they didn't take this in the level of priority that they should have. And I think more and more, what is good, and a combination of companies like what Forder's doing, and there are technologies I've been seeing a lot of mobile technologies, and soon it's becoming more and more secure to actually transact mobily because of all the verifications, identifications that are out there. Then, hey, I used to never understood why it was such a big deal to say your credit card number over the phone to somebody when you recognize they could be writing it down or taking it or going wherever it is. We're getting to those layers where we're protecting both the customer and the merchant, but companies like yours are really making sure that they're not losing the ones that really should be great. And that's a spectacular spot to sit in, Michael, because I think it's really an area that is such an upside revenue opportunity because they went overkill to be so secure, and you guys are stepping in to do that. So that's a great spot to be in, and I'm going to thank you in advance because I know that that's where it is from there. So help the Thrive Loud listeners get a little bit of a background where they could learn about Forder, and maybe more notably the types. We have lots of business professionals and companies who have their own businesses, their own e-commerce pieces. Tell us how they engage and how they connect to Forder.
Sure. So first, I encourage people to go on our website, which is just www.forder.com. There's a lot of case studies and a lot of materials and research that we actually publish to show people how fraud evolves, how fraudsters evolve, how the user experience impacts your fraud rates, and how it's all trends with different holidays, right? We have Valentine's Day coming up, and there are just really different trends with different products for different holidays. So there's a lot of materials there. I'd encourage people to follow us on Twitter, which is Forder, kind of @Forder Fraud Free. And just email us with any inquiry they have, whether to kind of the general info@Forder email or directly to me, which is michael@Forder.com. Right, we're really trying to build a community of retailers. Right, as I mentioned to you, the more retailers work with us, the better everything works, and they're kind of all of our customers understand that, and they refer more customers to us because as the community grows, we can leverage more data and we can catch all the fraudsters, weed them out of the ecosystem, and make sure people that are suspected, right? Think of even the financial inclusion aspect of it, right? The same people from specific countries or specific areas will get declined because there was some fraud rate spike from that area or from that country in the past, and now they can't buy anything. So having accurate fraud prevention not just protects the merchants, it actually creates restores the internet trust as it should have been.
I was going to say this, and you could tell it in the level of passion that you have for the detail. Listen, that you really care about making sure that transaction gets through. Look, the one that shouldn't get through, you want to stop. But the ones that aren't, it is really important because we judge our customer experience and that loyalty experience to that brand based on this. And to have a passion like that, I was going to ask one last question regarding the business, and that is, obviously, the nooks and crannies because you were at a hands-on component to doing this and probably building the technology. Which do you enjoy more, building the figuring out the best way to get us to a fraud-free e-commerce world, or growing this business that's kind of become a little bit of something that you should be proud of almost 100 strong and transacting with some of the most powerful merchants out there? Which of those do you like better, the nitty-gritty details or the business?
To be honest, right, it's the same thing. If we create the fraud-free commerce for everyone, we build a great business by a proxy of it. And if we're successful at building a great business, it means we've created this fraud-free commerce, right? They go hand in hand to me. And it starts every transaction you mentioned, right? It's one transaction at a time, just at a pace of 500,000 of them a day, and expanding, right? So it goes hand in hand.
It's awesome. Michael, I always ask this question to every guest, and I'm really curious to know where this one's going to go. Your all-time favorite movie?
Probably 12 Angry Men.
And why? Oh, my goodness.
I don't know. Wait, it's an old movie. I don't know if a lot of people remember that, but the process
Give us the background on this. It is a great movie. Yeah.
Right. There's a movie where there's a kid that's being charged with murder, and there's the whole scene, the whole movie is just showing the 12 jurors try to convince each other that he's guilty or innocent, different people. And it starts with 11 for guilty and 1 against, and then Henry Fonda kind of walks everyone through, examines every little fact and every little assumption that they have and shows them how, hey, well, we have to think about this. What's more probable? What does the data actually show versus the different biases people may have? It just shows you a view of the world that you have to be critical about things you may think. And it just shows you a lot about people's characters. I've watched this movie so many times.
I think judging by what we've heard about you and your knowledge about the fraudulent space, e-commerce, and where business is heading and how you've run your company, this is not surprising. And I think that's great. I love when the movie matches up really specifically with how someone is kind of made up in their DNA. So, Michael, thanks for sharing that. And hey, thank you for coming on Thrive Loud. This was great. This is a topic, by the way, that we've had people who have all these different payment and fintech technologies that are out there. And I love getting people and getting someone who's really in the weeds as it relates to something that is affecting every one of us every day. So thank you for coming on and sharing this with us and the Thrive Loud listeners.
Lou, it was a pleasure talking to you, and have a great weekend.
And you got it, man. And to all the Thrive Loud listeners out there, keep thriving onward and upward. And remember, be brief, be bright, be gone.
You've been listening to Thrive Loud with your host, Lou Diamond. Make sure to subscribe on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. And follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Thrive Loud. Or